English settlers arrived in places like Jamestown and Plymouth, facing a lethal introduction to the continent. During those first winters, up to half of the colonists died from disease, exposure, and outright starvation. Those who survived woke up to a harsh reality. They were standing in a vast, heavily forested wilderness with zero existing European infrastructure. Clearing land, building shelters, and growing food required immense physical exertion, and there were simply not enough hands to do the work. But the challenge wasn't identical everywhere. The east coast of North America was incredibly diverse. The climate and topography varied wildly from the freezing, rocky shores of New England down to the humid, swampy expanses of the South. Up north, the Appalachian Mountains crowd the coastline, leaving steep, rocky terrain with short growing seasons. As you travel south, however, the mountains recede, opening up into broad, flat, highly fertile coastal plains.
Because of this variance, the rules of survival changed depending on where your ship landed. Trying to plant a 100-acre cash crop in the rocky soil of Massachusetts would ruin you, just as trying to build a dense, water-powered milling town in the flat marshes of Virginia made no economic sense. By simply trying to stay alive and adapt to the dirt beneath their feet, these early colonists inadvertently planted the seeds for two distinct, deeply opposed societies living along the exact same coastline. In New England, the freezing winters and poor mountainous soil made large-scale agriculture virtually impossible. Farmers could barely grow enough to feed their own families, let alone generate massive export crops. So the northern colonists had to pivot. Instead of farming, they turned to industry by harnessing the region's fast-moving rivers to power grain and sawmills. They also looked to the ocean. The ragged northern coastline offered deep, natural harbors, allowing settlements like Boston to emerge as bustling centers of shipbuilding, commerce, and maritime trade. You can't operate a busy seaport or a complex mill network if everyone lives miles apart on isolated farms. This merchant-based economy naturally forced people to live close together in dense, tightly knit villages. This physical closeness was reinforced by the Puritans, a strict religious group seeking freedom from the Church of England. Their theology demanded that community members constantly monitor and support one another, solidifying the structure of these compact towns. Just south of New England, the Middle Colonies, places like New York and Pennsylvania, acted as a commercial bridge. They had slightly better soil for small-scale wheat farming, but they still relied heavily on their own busy ports and a highly diverse, tolerant mix of European immigrants to drive their economies. The northern landscape had organically forged a society built on community dependence, international trade, and early industry, rather than sprawling agriculture. Meanwhile, the southern Tidewater region offered a different reality. The land here was flat, the growing season was long, and the soil was exceptionally rich. With perfect farming conditions, there was no financial incentive to build tight commercial villages. Instead, settlers spread out over massive, isolated tracts of land, staking claim to as much acreage as they could physically manage. The entire southern economy shifted to focus on highly profitable, labor-intensive cash crops. Planters grew vast fields of tobacco, rice, and indigo to export back to Europe for massive profits. To work these fields, colonists initially relied on indentured servants. These were poor European immigrants who signed contracts agreeing to work for 4 to 7 years in exchange for free transport across the Atlantic and a small plot of land at the end of their term. By the 1660s, the region reached a tipping point. European demand for tobacco and rice skyrocketed, plantations expanded, and the desperate need for field workers drastically outpaced the supply of indentured servants willing to make the trip. To solve their labor shortage, Southern planters institutionalized lifelong, race-based chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is a system where human beings are legally classified as personal property that can be bought, sold, and inherited. Millions of people were kidnapped from Africa and forced into this system. By the 1770s, enslaved Africans made up a fifth of the total American population, reordering the demographics and daily reality of the southern states.
The South's fertile soil directly incentivized an economy reliant on extreme rural isolation and an oppressive enslaved labor force. It was a world entirely alien to the northern village model. This graphic compares the two distinct structures the colonies had formed by the time they declared independence. On one side, you have bustling commercial northern port towns, and on the other, sprawling, isolated southern plantations operated by enslaved labor. This data visualization shows how their economic outputs diverged. The North generated wealth through manufactured goods, shipbuilding, and global trade, while the South built its fortune almost entirely on raw cash crops extracted by forced labor. The image of the original 13 colonies as a single unified culture obscures a messier reality. The severe geographical differences along the East Coast had baked a rigid cultural and economic divide deep into the framework of the newly formed United States. As the nation began to rapidly expand westward, acquiring new territories, these two incompatible, geographically birthed ways of life were forced to compete for dominance. The difference in the dirt beneath the founders' feet dictated how they survived, how they worked, and who they enslaved, laying the inescapable, systemic groundwork for the American Civil War.